I'm a professor at the School of Urban and Regional Planning at Ryerson University, and I, together with Cherise Berta, who is the Executive Director of City Building Ryerson, are your co-hosts today for the session on mobility and public transit. To everyone who had a reading week last week, welcome back. To everyone who's continued learning, we're delighted to see you again in our regrouping around the topic of mobility and public transit. We're going to start today, even though we're virtually connected, with a recognition of the land on which we sit. If you're in a space other than Toronto, you can acknowledge the land where you are seated. But for those of us in Toronto, I'd like to acknowledge that the land that we are on is the territory traditionally of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And now it is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. As an urban planner, it's important for me to acknowledge the land because of planning's colonial history. It's also important as a faculty member at Ryerson University to think carefully about the land acknowledgement because our university is engaged in a process of renaming, in part because Egerton Ryerson, after whom the university is named, was one of the principal architects of the residential school system in Canada. And so this acknowledgement is a living, breathing commitment that we all need to think actively about in our lives as members of a community. Next, what I would like to do is to welcome Shailin Yeboah, who is one of our speakers today, and Shailin is going to bring the African Ancestral Land Acknowledgement.
Thank you, Pamela. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shailin Yeboah, and I will be reading the African Ancestral Land Acknowledgement. The City of Toronto acknowledges all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants either in this generation or generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. We pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent.
Thank you, Shailin. This is our fourth time together, so we don't need to spend too much time reminding everyone about this amazing constellation of people who are comprising the Civic Lab Toronto course. But I do really want to say, because it's important, that none of this would be possible without the incredible dedication, commitment, and really talented logistical skills of the team at the City of Toronto. So let's all just pause for 2 seconds. Everyone can virtually clap and say thank you. This is really an epic class. We're super lucky to be here, and it is a lot of work behind the scenes, and we're grateful to everyone who's picking it up. A few housekeeping matters before we get on to the content. You all know that the session is being recorded, and you're asked not to share any personal information in the meeting today. This session, along with the other ones, are being recorded, and they're available on the toronto.ca and the civiclabto.ca website, and your faculty members will also share it with you if you're a student. There's time for questions and answers in today's event, and you can use the Q&A in the chat to ask questions. Any questions that aren't answered live today will get a follow-up by next Wednesday from City staff on your questions. If you're using WebEx to connect and you're finding you're having technology issues, you're also able to phone in and listen. And you've got that connection information provided by your faculty members at your home institution. Lastly, I'll remind everyone that other than the speakers and the moderators, all participants are going to be on mute today, so you won't be able to speak live. All right, let's get on with the really important, interesting stuff. Okay, today we're going to hear from 3 city staff. We're going to start with Michael Hallen, who's the manager from Policy and Analysis in the Transportation Planning, City Planning Unit. Then Shailin Yeboah is going to come back. Shailin is the Director of Program Management and Planning in the Transit Expansion Office. And then we're going to hear from Becky Katz, and Becky's the Manager of City and Pedestrian Projects and Transportation Services. Before we turn it over to City staff, though, we've got Councillor Mike Layton. Councillor Layton is the councillor for Ward 11, which is University Rosedale, and he's going to bring us a few opening remarks. Over to you, Councillor Layton.
Joining today our city staff, as well as our academic partners for bringing this group of you together and putting together this curriculum. You see, I started my journey to politics in just about the exact same place you're sitting right now. Maybe the very same rooms. I went to the University of Toronto and studied political science and environmental management, and then later to York University, where I studied environmental studies and urban planning. My first job, coincidentally, at City Hall was in another counselor's office as part of a work-study program with a former colleague of mine, Councillor Davis. where I learned the ropes at City Hall and fell in love with policy change and decision making on the municipal level. Because this really is the level of government that I think impacts people's lives the most. From the moment you wake up in the morning to brush your teeth, cook your food, to walk to school, to work, to anywhere you got to go, how you get there, what you pass on the way, where you may live as a result. That is all your municipal government at work. And so it's critically important to the day-to-day of people's lives. And I know today you're talking about mobility and how people move around our city, also critically important. There's, I think, some important things to recognize in it is that there are enormous demands on our public right-of-way, the space in between buildings and between parks and other other amenities. There are a lot of people that want to occupy that space. There are a lot of people that have a very strong connection to that space. But it's important for us to achieve some of our most important goals. I'm going to talk about three of them really, really quickly. One is achieving our climate target. We have declared a climate emergency in the city. I helped write the motion for it. And that requires us to get to net zero by 2050 at the latest. You're going to find in about 2 months' time that goal is going to actually be 2040, which is exciting in a lot of ways, but also there's a lot of work to be done. Because to achieve that, we have to get 38% of our emissions are from transit. 80% of that is personal vehicles. So we have to somehow get 75% of trips under 5K on people walking or cycling. We're not even close to that right now. And we know that more people are biking, more people are buying bikes, more people are cycling for utilitarian purposes, how to get around. My family is one. We own a cargo bike for my kids, and my partner and I also have our own bikes. But my partner didn't grow up in Toronto. She didn't grow up on the back of a bike riding through streets with no lanes. So she's of the type of cyclist that wants a protected lane and only feels safe in the protected lane. So we have to start delivering that, but that takes space on our roads. So that's where a lot of the conflict comes and the demands come for managing space in the public right-of-way. And it's not easy. We fight for years for every little inch of road that we have reassigned to another use. So it's important to recognize that all the work that our city staff do to making even some of the smaller changes that people then get to experience after that. Safety is another major issue. This week, probably more than any other in the past couple of years. My heart breaks every time I see an accident that could have been prevented by either better infrastructure, or better behavior by drivers, or better enforcement by our enforcement officials. These are all things we need to work on for us to achieve the Vision Zero that we have as a target for the city. And finally, the efficiency of our transportation system. When you think about things like public transit, all of us want to walk out of our door and jump on a subway and get across town quickly, but the fact is we can't do that. That's not efficient. So we have to figure out a way to make decisions that build the most effective and efficient subway system to get the most people around from where they live or work to where they're going home, school, wherever. And unfortunately, I would say and this predates me by like 5 decades, the transportation system, the public transit system in Toronto has largely been more political than it has been practical in its implementation. We also have a situation where the city of Toronto has the least ability to contribute financially to projects because we collect about 9% of the tax of tax revenue, and so we have the least amount ability to collect taxes and pay for things because the other levels of government collect about 91% of the tax revenue. So all these things together, when we're talking about how we reshape and how we change the way people get around, it's critically important to how our city operates from an economic standpoint, but also achieves some of these really fundamental goals around public safety, around our climate objectives, as well as just making it more bearable to live in a city of Toronto. Nobody wants to sit in traffic, but at the same time, no, we have to think about those other climate goals because we can't just build roads to get out of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Layton. We're next going to move over and I'm going to cede the floor to Manjeet Jita. Manjeet is the Director of Strategic Partnerships for the City of Toronto and one of the key drivers, or cyclists in this case, of this whole project together. Thank you, Manjeet. Over to you.
Thank you, Pamela, for moderating this session, and thank you, Councillor Layton, for your thought-provoking remarks. I'm sure the students are going to have lots of questions for you at the end of the session. And good morning, students, professors, and staff, and welcome back to session 4 of Civic Lab TO Common Curriculum. As you know, today's session is focused on mobility and public transit, and we will again feature an amazing group of staff who will give you an insight into their work and the city, and maybe even a glimpse into their own professional journeys. As you listen to the presentations, I would encourage you to think about the question of mobility and public transit and consider how the administration and political structures work together to meet the transportation needs of our city. What collaborations and partnerships, both internally within the city and with external stakeholders, are required to advance this work? How do city staff navigate the jurisdictional responsibilities and authorities, especially with other orders of government? And you heard Councillor Layton talk about the funding sort of roles that each order of government plays here. And how can we successfully engage community members in authentic collaboration to inform transit and mobility policy, planning, and program design and delivery? At a personal level, I would encourage you to think about your own experiences and what transportation options are available to you to get to school, to work, to a doctor's appointment, to pick up your groceries, or if you just want to go to Earl's for tacos and drinks with your friends. Think about how you move around the city and what are your experiences of our transportation system and what you would change. Consider, does the system have a differential impact on some communities, and what can be done to design one that supports community connection and access to services, programs, employment, and education for all of us? Lastly, I want you, the next generation of leaders, to imagine what our city would look like if we design one where everyone thrives, where our businesses thrive and also our residents, especially those who are the most vulnerable. The pandemic has been devastating, but the one thing that I keep hearing everywhere I go is the desire to rebuild a better city. I hope that in the near future, some of you will consider working for the City of Toronto, maybe you'll be my colleagues, in the administration or maybe as an elected official. And others of you may decide to work for other public and private sector groups and become city partners. Whichever path you take, you have the opportunity to make a difference and reimagine our city, one where its transit system connects us socially, culturally, and economically. With that, and with those questions for you to consider as you listen to our amazing speakers, I'm going to pass it back to Pamela to introduce our guests. Thank you so much and have a great morning.
Thank you, Manjeet. All right, all set? Here we go. Michael Haynes, our first speaker. Michael is the Manager of Policy and Analysis in the Transportation Planning Unit of the City Planning Department. Michael, off you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Pamela, for introducing me, and thank you, everyone, for having me here today. I'm Michael Hayne, as Pamela said, and I'm the Program Manager of Transportation Planning's Policy and Analysis section in the City Planning Division. And I've been in my current role for a little over a year and a half and with the city for 9 years. Before joining the city, I worked for the Region of Peel, and before that, I worked for the University of Toronto. My career started as a transportation modeler, and over time, I've branched out into other areas, different parts of planning, and also bringing in a lot more policy work. One of the things that I really like about transportation is how it attracts people from lots of different backgrounds. And I think a lot of that is a result of there not being many post-secondary programs dedicated to transportation, at least in Ontario and Canada. I personally have a background in civil engineering and economics, but I know that I've met people from many different fields, really any sort of engineering or planning, geography, economics, public administration. Even one of my colleagues has a PhD in nuclear medicine. So really, whatever your background is, there is a way to get into transportation, and regardless of what your level of schooling is as well. I think part of why transportation is so attractive and brings in so many different people is something that Councillor Layton alluded to, that it really is ubiquitous in our lives. Nearly everything we do is enabled or somehow influenced by our ability and the ability of the transportation system to move people and goods. And reflecting that sort of the magnitude of the task, The city's divided up responsibility for its transportation system across many different divisions and agencies. You're only hearing from 3 today, but that's far from all of them. And I hope that you'll get a bit of a taste of what we do. So I personally come from City Planning Division, and we manage the growth and physical form of the city through our stewardship of the official plan and zoning bylaws. And I'll talk about both of those more in a moment. But the division separates itself into several different sections, one of which is transportation planning. Our section vision statement is on the slide, but effectively, we're responsible for the long-term plan of the city's transportation system and establishing transportation-related regulations for new development, as well as reviewing whether new development is meeting those requirements. I personally lead the policy and analysis unit within transportation planning. We develop the long-term plans and regulations, and we also support other groups, both within city planning and around the city, that are working on shorter time horizons or smaller areas within the city. So municipalities in Ontario are creatures of the province, and what that really means is that we have to do what they tell us to. And one of those things that they tell us to do is to maintain an official plan to describe what our goals, objectives, and policies are to shape the physical form of the city and to manage and direct growth. So this also covers social, economic, and natural environmental issues. The plans that we establish have to be consistent and not conflict with various provincial policies, in particular the provincial policy statement and the growth plan. We also try to be consistent with other provincial policies, like Metrolinx's regional transportation plan. And we also try to coordinate with our neighboring municipalities so that issues around the border are treated consistently across different municipalities. Official plans are living documents, and the Planning Act that requires us to have an official plan also requires that we review them periodically. Practically speaking, in Toronto, it takes a really long time to review the official plan because it is the city's quite complicated. So even though we're required to review it every 5 years, practically speaking, we're reviewing it constantly. As an example, the transportation component of the last official plan review took 7 years. So as soon as we finish one review, we're basically starting the next one. One of the features of an official plan is that you have to follow the process laid out in the Planning Act to change it. And what that does is it gives a little bit of protection to people in the city so that they don't wake up one day and find a highway in their backyard that they weren't expecting. Part of the process of creating an official plan is consulting with the public, and the city takes that quite seriously. We always do much more consultation than is technically required, and you may have been involved in some of the consultations in the past. At a high level, the official plan sets out the long-term vision for the city. Council doesn't bind itself with this document, but because it does have to follow a statutory process to make changes, it means that directions in the official plan are a little more stable than other council directions. Our particular official plan is written as an integrated document, so you really have to read the whole thing to get the full sense of what we're trying to do from a transportation perspective. But to summarize, for transportation, many of the policies are directed at the city and how the city should do things. So those directions are generally not implemented in the official plan itself, but implemented in other supporting documents. But to undertake capital works, anything that the city does has to be consistent with the official plan. So you'll see things in the official plan like maps related to the widths of streets or what our long-term higher order and frequent surface transit networks will be. And also things like descriptions of what the cycling network should ultimately look like. So again, this isn't laying out the steps of how we get to that ultimate vision. It just describes the ultimate vision. And there are many other documents that set out the how. So for example, various standards, guidelines, secondary plans, and other documents. A few I've got the covers on the slide. And there are other implementation handed through other initiatives, like small area studies. The official plan really just guides that overall work, and the details are worked out in other documents. Another implementation tool that we use is the zoning bylaw, and zoning bylaws put the official plan into effect by having specific requirements for construction and new development. And among other things, they describe how land can be used and where structures can be located. people aren't able to do whatever they want with their property. They do have to comply with the zoning bylaws. From the transportation perspective, zoning bylaws set out standards for how much automobile and bicycle parking is both required and allowed. And it also sets regulations for loading areas and access points like driveways. We're in the process of reviewing particular aspects of the zoning bylaw now, and I'll talk about that on a later slide. We were asked to talk about some of the challenges that Toronto's facing, and I think it's kind of obvious to everyone that the big challenge we're facing is COVID, as it's the biggest challenge for most things. I don't really think you need me to get into detail because it's in the press all the time, so I'll focus on some of the challenges that existed before COVID and we're fairly sure will continue to exist after COVID. The first is population and employment growth. As you can probably all guess, the demand for transportation tends to scale with both population and employment. So if the city's growing, it tends to also mean growth in people and goods moving around the city. Because transportation doesn't suddenly stop at the city's borders, growth in the surrounding areas also tend to lead to an increase in transportation demand in the city. In the last several decades, Toronto and the surrounding area and the greater Golden Horseshoe have generally been experiencing a lot of growth. And this has put a lot of pressure on our transportation system. As Councillor Layton suggested, the transportation system hasn't been doing a great job of keeping up with that growth. And that's put us into a bit of a challenge of how to manage it. Also, as Councillor Layton mentioned, Council declared a climate emergency in 2019 and set a target of net zero by 2050. As he said, transportation is a major emission source of these emissions. It's over a third of the emissions and 80% from private vehicles. He also mentioned the climate goals that are on the slide, and I'll emphasize and reiterate what he said, that these are very significant challenges. There's certainly no guarantee that we'll meet these goals without extremely significant action, and everyone is going to have to change their behavior a little bit in order to meet this. It's certainly not an easy challenge. Thinking about equity from a macro or city level, access to high quality transportation certainly isn't uniformly distributed across the city. The high quality pieces of infrastructure tend to be major projects like highways or higher order transit lines, and necessarily those can't be everywhere. The report that I'm highlighting on the slide here is getting a bit old, but it's David Hulchanski's 3 Cities Within Toronto report from, I think it's 2007, 2006, 2007. And what you see in this graph here is the distribution of household incomes across the city, with blues being higher incomes and reds being lower incomes. It's a pretty clear pattern that high incomes tend to locate around the higher order transit system, particularly the young part of Line 1. And that over time, these areas have also tended to attract more high income households. As a region, we've done quite a poor job of expanding transit to areas that have lower incomes. And that is another significant challenge we're facing. Despite these challenges, there are significant opportunities that we have as well. And I think the most important of these is that challenges are being recognized. As Councillor said, there is a climate emergency that's been declared. We are making significant investments in the higher order transit system now, and those investments are being made by all 3 levels of government. So we know that there are challenges and we're working to face them. And I'm sure that my colleagues will talk more about how we're doing that in their presentations as well. Also, what we've experienced recently is fairly significant technological advancements that have made it a lot easier for people to find new ways to move around the city. For example, micromobility, e-scooters, e-bikes are relatively new, and they're enabling people to travel in new ways. Apps are making ride sharing easier, or also making it easier to find an efficient route around the city. From the planning perspective, GPS data in particular has made it much easier for us to collect travel time data. Until quite recently, our approach to that was to just hire people to drive up and down major streets and record how long it takes to get up and down the street. Obviously, that's not particularly efficient. With GPS data, we can get a very significant sample of all of the people traveling across all of the city all of the time. And that happens for less money than what it would take to just have a few major streets monitored one day out of a year. So this is really enabling new sorts of analysis for us. More powerful computers have also opened up new sorts of analysis for us. There's a lot of uncertainty that occurs within the transportation system. Travel behaviors vary a lot from person to person, and also for a particular person vary a lot from day to day. And this makes it difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen in the transportation system. One of the tools that we try to use to address this is scenario testing. And that's a very valuable tool for identifying a range of possible outcomes. But in the past, it was quite expensive. We didn't have powerful enough computers to do a lot of different scenario tests. But as the cost of computing has come down, our ability to do scenario testing has gone up. I want to expand on that and what we're doing with transportation models. Generally, scenario testing does happen with transportation models because it allows us to test quite expensive different policy alternatives in a relatively low-cost way. There is a famous statistician, George Box, who said that all models are wrong and some are useful. I think that's a very important statement. When you think about other models that we're familiar with, the most common really are weather models. But even though the weather forecast that we get for a particular day is often not very accurate, it still gives us useful information about how we should dress. And that's really the way you should think about transportation models. They aren't perfect, but they are quite indicative of what the future could potentially be. And so this information helps us make decisions about what policies or projects we should pursue. And it really allows us to test that wide range of possible scenarios at a relatively low cost. And so able to make the right decision that aligns with our strategic objectives. Typically, the sorts of models that we use are either travel demand models or accessibility models. And these are really two sides of the same coin. Accessibility models tend to describe the potential to travel, and travel demand models describe what travel is actually going to happen. So when you see something like a ridership projection for a new line, that's the result of a travel demand model, whereas a measure like a walk score or a transit score they're both examples of accessibility measures. So these are both useful pieces of information, and when you combine them with other sorts of information, they're very useful in informing different sorts of policy and project decisions. But traditionally, we have relied on travel demand models because they tend to be easier to construct and run. Accessibility models are still an emerging area of research, but they're gaining a lot of traction. I think part of why they're gaining popularity is that people are recognizing that just the potential to travel has value in itself, not just the travel that's actually realized. And our official plan has recognized the importance of increasing accessibility in the city, and it's made it a goal to do so. So in order to make it easier for people to complete their daily needs and to participate in everything that the city has to offer. So the existing transportation accessibility tool that the city has access to is not particularly quick. It doesn't align with a lot of our other workflow, and it's still limited by computational power in order to do a lot of analysis in a limited amount of time. So what we're doing is working on a new tool that will better complement our regional travel demand tool and let us better answer some of these new questions that are emerging and to communicate the value of different policies or projects in a new way. So with this new tool, we'll be able to better assess the quality of the transportation system across different modes, and we'll be able to better target specific areas that may be disadvantaged or disadvantaged subpopulations and understand the impact of changes to the transportation system on those particular areas or groups. We think that these tools are absolutely critical for addressing a lot of the inequity related challenges that the city is facing. So instead of focusing on capacity or ridership, we would be able to shift our focus more to connecting areas of the city that aren't particularly well served now. Of course, any sort of major transition like that isn't going to be easy or quick. There's going to be a lot of effort that we have to put in to overcome the decades of reliance on travel demand models and make people understand the value of communicating these sorts of new measures. Another project we're working on right now is a review of the zoning bylaw, and I did say I'd come back to this. I spoke about how zoning bylaws are the things that implement official plan policies. So among other things, the zoning bylaw establishes the standards for how much parking you're required to have or how much you're allowed to have, and also where it can be located, particularly for new and expanded developments. The zoning bylaw doesn't influence development that already exists. It just impacts what development is to come in the future. and we're reviewing the parking standards in the zoning bylaw now. The last time those standards were reviewed was in 2005, and obviously over the 16 years, a lot has changed. We've had a change in the way that people travel around the city, with auto becoming less important and modes like bicycle becoming more important. We've had a growing recognition of the climate impacts of transportation and the urgent need to shift people away from cars. We've seen the cost of transportation and housing increase quite significantly, and there are more households going car-free as a result to try and mitigate those costs. And all of these things have contributed to a global trend of cities moving away from parking requirements and towards a more open system where people can pick the amount of parking that's appropriate to their needs. By following a similar sort of approach, we're hoping to achieve a few objectives in the official plan. I've listed them on the slide there. By supporting land and cost-efficient forms of development, what I mean is that we'd use less land or money to produce a comparable amount of living space or working space. And that would just be better for everyone in terms of controlling cost. Encouraging alternatives to the automobile really means that by making parking a little less freely available, it would encourage people to think about their travel more and potentially use walking, cycling, and transit more often. We also want to ensure that the equity needs of everybody are met. We recognize that there are people and trips that can't easily switch to something other than automobile, certainly in the foreseeable future. So it's not that we are eliminating people's ability to construct parking, we're just limiting how much can be constructed and also allowing people to build no parking if they don't need parking. And through this process, we're also hoping to simplify the zoning bylaw to make it a little easier for people that aren't using the zoning bylaw every day to be able to read and understand it. Some of the changes that we're going to recommend, we're taking these to council before the end of the year. We're going to recommend removing most parking minimums except a very low level of parking related to visitors and also parking for accessible parking. Where there aren't already parking maximums, we're planning to introduce them. And what this does is recognize that there is a limit to how much car traffic our roads can accommodate, and normalizing the idea that there is only so much traffic that we should allow. We're also introducing requirements that would support other non-auto forms of travel, such as bicycles, in ways like requiring bicycle maintenance facilities in new developments. Like I said, we're trying to simplify the zoning bylaw. Right now, there are actually requirements for 88 different uses in 5 different geographic areas in the city. Obviously, that's a lot. We're hoping to reduce it to approximately 10 different uses and 3 geographic areas. So that will make it much easier for people to read and understand the bylaw. And we're also proposing to introduce a monitoring program that would make exercises like this easier in the future, so that we can adjust the parking rates as required over time to meet our objectives. So these sorts of changes we think are very important in terms of how we can accommodate the growth that's coming to the city, how we can meet our environmental goals, and also how we can help ensure housing affordability. I just wanted to leave everyone with a few lessons that I've learned from my time at the city and even before joining the city. The first is the importance of communication. I found that that really wasn't emphasized when I was going through engineering school. It was something that I really only learned once I started working. A good idea really isn't enough on its own. You have to be able to convince other people that your idea is good and do it in a way that makes them want to agree with you. If you've convinced someone but pissed them off in the process, they're not going to help you. So there's always room for improvement here, and it's really a very important skill. Another thing that I've learned is that the city isn't as all-knowing as I thought it was. It's amazing how many things that the city doesn't really know about, and one of those things is what the parking supply is. And that lack of data makes a lot of analysis challenging. And it's not just whether the data is there, but it needs to be there in a way that you can actually do analysis with it. And there's a lot of room for improvement at the city with that. Another point is that you don't need everyone to agree with you to actually make change. At council, you just need a simple majority to adopt things. And if what you were trying to do was simple and everyone agreed with you, it would probably be done already. So really, no matter what you're doing, if it's going to make a difference, you're probably going to have to work really hard at convincing people. And you're going to experience that there is a wide range of opinions among people, both in the public and at council. And like I said, you don't need all of them to agree with you. And the last point I want to leave you with is that running a city is a team sport. Everyone at the city feels overwhelmed pretty much all the time, and they're making constant decisions about what work they're going to advance. If you want to actually advance some of these things, you need to have good relationships with other people so that they actually want to work with you and advance the things that you want to advance. And again, having a good idea isn't good enough. You really do have to work as a team. And I'll just leave my contact information here. I'm very happy to have chats with anybody that wants to reach out. Just try not to do it immediately because we're on a deadline for Wednesday. But after that, I'm very happy to talk with anybody that has any questions. So thank you very much for your time.
Michael, thank you so much. Thank you for the rich and informing presentation. And thanks also for your really honest appraisal of both how interesting and challenging it is to do the important work that you do in City Hall. Okay, our next speaker up is Shalon Yaboa, and Shalon is the director she's the director of program management and planning in the Transit Expansion Office. We're laughing in our pre-call about Transit Expansion Office. Sounds like a simple job title, but it's a rather massive enterprise. So we're super excited to hear from Shalon about her experience. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela, and good morning, everyone, again. My name is Shalon Yaboa. I'm the Director of Program Management and Planning, believe it or not. My title used to be more of a mouthful, and I've cut it down, but it still seems to be a mouthful. I am going to walk you through who I am, quick introduction and my background. I'm going to provide a City of Toronto overview, walk you through some of the city's transit objectives, take a quick snapshot of the Transit Expansion Division, our role and scope, our principal role as a one-window access into the city, as well as the general municipal role in the transit project planning, procurement, and development, and delivery process. I'm also going to walk you through some of our key partners that we collaborate with. I'm going to give you a little bit of a reality check to give you a view of some of the challenges that we face. And I've provided some of the key projects that we are currently working on. The intention isn't really to go through them in depth, but just to highlight them for everybody's information. So again, I'm Shalon Yaboa. I work in the Transit Expansion Office. I have a degree in urban and regional planning. I started my career several years ago in the City of Toronto in the planning department. And at that time, it's interesting hearing Michael's presentation. I actually started on the first phase of the city's zoning bylaw project. And it's, taking different twists and turns since that time, but that's where I started my career in this multifaceted field. In this time, I've, worked in several positions, both public and private sector. And now I'm back at the city again after several years away, working on different projects, most notably with Waterfront Toronto and waterfront revitalization, which was also very exciting and dynamic and has a lot of interfaces with the transit work that I'm doing now. Slide 3, please. So an overview of how things work at the city. The Transit Expansion Division plays a key role in navigating the requirements for transit expansion projects to ensure an efficient process. Now, we do so respecting all of the city's regulatory standards and bylaws, most notably the City of Toronto Act. So the City of Toronto Act provides Toronto's government with broad powers to pass bylaws regarding matters ranging from public safety, economic and social development, environmental well-being, and it includes regulatory powers such as land use planning tools that Michael went through earlier, roads, which Becky will touch on after me, water and wastewater management. So it really does reinforce the message that Councillor Layton started with, in the fact that, you know, the city and municipal governments as a whole really impact our day-to-day lives. So these bylaws are codified into the municipal code, which includes bylaws related to parks, water supply, sewers, land development, amongst other things. From a transit perspective, the city's role includes regulatory approvals and permit issuance, advancing council direction, leveraging transit expansion as a way to drive and implement city building objectives and improving transit access to build a better, more equitable city for its all residents. Next slide, please. So as part of the transit work that we are actively engaged in, there are a number of strategic priorities that guide staff involvement in our discussions and negotiations with our key government partners. I'm going to touch on a few key ones. So the first one, city building, balanced growth and development. We are balancing the delivery of transit infrastructure with growth, development, and social equity. The last of those components we have not done well, as per Michael's presentation, but we are improving every day to ensure that we are balancing the needs of our residents across the city in a more equitable manner. I will also touch on capital coordination, because this is a very important component that, you know, unless you sit in traffic during the summer months, you don't really think about on a day-to-day basis. But the city on a daily basis is improving our ability to coordinate and deliver all of the city's capital projects, including the transit piece. Now, we are living through an unprecedented time where governments are spending a lot of money on transit and building transit infrastructure. Now, unfortunately, things typically don't happen in the manner in which we expect or can respond to quickly. And so on the one hand, we have all of this amazing, exciting transit work going on, but it also has to be fit within a larger context of our regular state of good repair to our sewers, our water mains, and our roads. And so we have a tremendous capital works program that's programmed, and now we are trying to balance that and overlay this transit work on top of it. And so it definitely has its challenges, but we're looking for ways to appropriately coordinate and look for opportunities to combine the delivery of work to ensure that there's a minimal impact to local residents, businesses, and communities as a whole. The other key priority that I'd like to touch on, recognizing that I'm presenting to future leaders, to future employees, and potentially colleagues, is community engagement. Community engagement is an integral part of the transit work. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from young people. It is integral to the process that we are engaging in. It is also integral to the future, because we're doing all of this work for you. So we want to make sure that as we're implementing all of this important transit infrastructure, that it actually meets the needs of current and future users. Next slide, please. So the Transit Expansion Division as a whole, what do we do? So our mission is to work with partners to expand transit infrastructure in order to facilitate access to socio-economic opportunities, services, to other city neighborhoods and the wider region as a whole. So it's important to note that before the implementation of this office, a lot of the roles that we have now consolidated existed throughout the city. They just existed in different divisions, and we weren't really always aware what the right hand and the left hand weren't always aware what we were doing. And so it was important to consolidate this into one location where we had a breadth of knowledge and also the ability to assess what was important for the city, have an awareness of what we are all doing to ensure more efficient implementation. And so as part of that, the establishment of the office, we are now responsible for leading intergovernmental engagement with other orders of government and transit agencies to facilitate the delivery of transit. We have a centralized program management function, to ensure that we're providing end-to-end oversight of the entire transit project lifecycle. We also coordinate with internal city partners and divisions to ensure that there's a strategic approach into providing the necessary inputs for transit expansion projects. And we coordinate decision-making, including consulting with various internal and external stakeholders, negotiating various agreements, implementing a governance framework to not only track issues, but to ensure that effective decision-making is taking place in a timely manner. And of course, we report to council to seek the requisite authorities and directions needed to keep this entire process moving. Next slide, please. And so this is just a quick snapshot of all of the internal stakeholders that we consult with. The process works such that the Transit Expansion Division acts as a one-window access into all things city. So regardless of what's being sought, whether it's input on various designs or environmental assessments, it comes in through the Transit Expansion Office, and we act as a facilitator with all of these divisions to ensure at the end of the day that the city's interests are not only being considered, but they're being incorporated as part of this process. And we have the main divisions that we deal with, like city planning, transportation services, engineering and construction services, and Toronto Water. But we also have our supporting divisions who act and help us through their expertise on various elements, including assessing the financial impact to the city through finance and treasury. We also have legal services that is integral into helping us negotiate the various agreements, and there are many in all of this transit implementation. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that this whole process is driven and supported and also underpinned by our elected officials who help provide us direction and the necessary authorities to keep this moving. Next slide, please. So the role of municipal government in this transit process is such that we provide inputs at various stages of the project lifecycle. So at a planning and preliminary design phase, We usually engage with our respective partners like Metrolinx in reviewing and providing input into all of the environmental assessment documentation. This is where we look to inform and influence the proposed mitigation solutions and strategies for all of these projects. And we look at opportunities to ensure that our requirements, either our standards, our bylaws, our specific design requirements, are going to be incorporated into the procurement process for delivery. So through procurement, we typically incorporate our standards. As I've just said, we're part of, oftentimes, in evaluating some of the prospective contractors that are being hired to deliver this work. So we provide input that way. We help inform their evaluation process. And when we get to detailed design and construction, we're looking at assisting permitting process to ensure that all of the pieces are in place to secure permits. We inform the design process heavily by ensuring it reflects our standards and processes. We also ensure that the requirements for different areas like our water infrastructure or occupying our roads, anything that's required by way of permitting approvals, are all sought and approved before the delivery of this work. And of course, as part of this work, we're looking for opportunities to deliver some of the city's capital projects to minimize the potential disruption at the locations that they are taking place. We're also, by doing so, ensuring that we are being efficient from a financial standpoint, because you don't want a situation where you have a project being constructed for transit through Metrolinx, let's say, followed by everything gets cleaned up and closed off, only to have a city project for sewer or water main coming in and sort of occupying the same space again and causing the same construction disruption. So we're very much looking for opportunities for efficiencies as part of all of this large-scale infrastructure work. And then finally, as part of it, because in many cases they are building infrastructure that the city will own, operate, and maintain, there are specific requirements for inspection and ensuring you follow the proper commissioning and acceptance protocol process so that the city will take it over once the infrastructure is built. Next slide, please. So to build the scale of transit infrastructure required in Toronto, it requires all levels of government working together to contribute funding, planning, coordinated capital delivery, and service integration. So these are some of the key partners that we work with on all of these projects. I think one of the things that's key here is that we don't all have the same mandate. We don't all want to approach the delivery and implementation of transit in the same way. But the thing that binds us is that we recognize that transit does need to be built, and more transit is needed in the city and surrounding areas to shore up our economic futures. So while we may not approach it the same, we all recognize that it needs to be done, and that is the driving force behind the partnership and collaboration that's currently underway. Next slide, please. And so the reality check. So when I was thinking about this part, I wanted to make sure that I touched upon the challenges that actually might interest you as students who are at institutions of higher learning and at some point thinking about what you want to do in your future and getting into the workforce. And so fiscal constraints are a reality of the work that we do. There's only so much funding and so much money to drive and to drive certain priorities. And so the city is limited in its ability to accelerate all of our transit initiatives because there's only so much funding available. In terms of the second two, I think those are directly relatable to the current audience in that we have a limited market capacity and the city's limited in its capacity to respond to these accelerated timelines because there's a lot of work and there's just not enough bodies to deliver all of this work. And so they're both related. There is a lot of work due to the unprecedented amount of funding being spent on transit, especially in the skilled trades. There's only so many people right now that are able to do this work. And so I would encourage you as part of your the decisions that you're going to make very soon in thinking about how you want to take your role in contributing to expanding the market capacity, not just for skilled and technical trades, but also for the city as well, because we are in need of a lot of hands to be able to meet these transit delivery priorities. And just at the end, I have a few key transit projects that we are working on. I think these presentations will be provided. If you're interested, please feel free to review them. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone. It's been a pleasure being here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. And I'm just confirming that, yes, the students will have a chance to review the slides in more detail. And the questions that you're asking, if they're not answered now, will be followed up on later. So just a reminder to all of our attendees today that you can ask questions. Some of them are being responded to in real time, and you will get a follow-up on the ones that aren't. So thank you again, Shalene, for that. And thank you too for the reality check. Again, this is one of the most important and impactful parts of this, the way this course is unfolding, is that everybody gets to understand how things really work. And that's so important. Okay, our last speaker today is Becky Katz. And Becky is the manager of cycling and pedestrian projects and transportation services. So Becky, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks. You can hear me okay? Great. I'm going to share my screen. It is so wonderful to be with all of you this morning. I do miss the time when I could actually be with you all, but this will have to do. So I thought I'd start with a little bit about me and my career. It has not been a straight line, and I don't think anybody who's spoken today has had a straight line career, but I'm an engineer. I went to Cornell for undergrad, where I thought I wanted to be a biomedical engineer, and then I had to induce small strokes into rats. And I was like, this is not for me. I then had the opportunity to move to Saudi Arabia to do my master's degree. And that's a whole other story that I'm happy to share later. I then took a year off of life, which, you know, if you are all considering not just what next steps are in your career, but also your actual life, you know, these things are possible and you should integrate that into your career story and journey. So I lived in India for a year and Nepal. I then moved to Atlanta because my partner got into a university for his PhD, and I worked for a community nonprofit. So my passion in my education and in my career has always been the overlap of engineering and community engagement and working with people, just the whole idea of working with people. So this nonprofit worked with parks and neighborhoods to redesign their own parks. I then moved to the city of Atlanta, Georgia, so I'm American. And I actually was the first person ever hired to work on cycling-related infrastructure. And that really was not such a logical jump for me. I was really into parks, and I just used a bike because I didn't own a car. So I used the train and the bike in Atlanta, and people were very baffled by me. I then took an opportunity in Germany where I did a fellowship. And then I got this amazing job in the city of Toronto. So I am a fairly newcomer to Canada and to the city. So I moved here September 2019, so just a couple of months before the pandemic. So, you know, I feel like I know Toronto in a very specific way. I know all the streets, but I don't actually know, you know, where people go out, where people eat dinner. So it's been a very unique, you know, getting to know the city of Toronto, both the city government itself, but also the city. But yeah, I just like to say that your career, but also your personal aspirations can be combined and are important. And that's been very important for me. And I'm happy to talk more. So where do I work? I work for Transportation Services, which is a division of the city. It's huge. I work in a huge organization. I work with 1,300 other people. Obviously, I don't know everybody, but we oversee the roads. So in summer, we are the asset owner. So, you know, operational changes on the streets, new bike lanes that go in, many of the trail corridors. That's really Transportation Services' role, is to change and to operate our streets, except for some of the expressways and always some unique situations. Not only is Transportation Services as an organization big, but the city is big. And so we oversee a lot of roads, and we oversee a lot of sidewalks and bike lanes. And, you know, we're also always increasing the number, particularly of sidewalks and cycle tracks and new signals. So this is kind of the org chart. I have to say that as I've gotten through my career, org charts to me have become like something I dork out about. Perhaps isn't the first most entertaining part of the job, but we have 9 different groups within Transportation Services that we split ourselves up through. And the team I work on, or the section I work in, is project design and management. And our whole section, which is made up of 4 groups, is focused on capital projects. So really the design of new projects that are being installed. For the most part, because our city is built out, we're working on the redesign of existing streets. So, you know, yeah, so that's really what we're working on, is how do you transform our current streets into something different, into something better. But, you know, why do we do that? I think Michael and Shallon have already summed up, and Councillor Layton have already summed up the multitude of city policies, so I won't go into it. But particularly cycling and walking, there is a lot of impetus and guiding policies behind it. But our team is really here to try and distill some of these policies and make that on the ground change. And I think it's important to note that there is a huge rise, and it's amazing to see the energy around cycling and walking. But cycling and walking is not a substitute for driving, and that's not how we're going to move the needle on how we all move around in the city. And it's really cycling, walking, plus transit. So I'm really glad that Shallon is here and is doing such amazing work on moving the transit file, and with Michael in city planning's work, because these 3 things together is how we're going to reduce our impact on the climate, and how we can make a safer street that is more accessible and more equitable, is really cycling, walking, and transit, with driving still considering being part of our transportation system. It's still an important, you know, goods movement strategies, you know, people who have mobility challenges, but it's really about rebalancing our street. For the past 80 years, we have focused on car infrastructure. We have built such amazing things. The Gardner, I mean, if you drive on that, it is just wild, right? You're elevated to a dense urban area, And that type of innovation is what we need to also bring to the transit file, to the cycling, and to the walking, infrastructure as well. So what does my team do? So first of all, I work on an amazing team of 20 people from all different backgrounds, all different ages, all different educational backgrounds. And so I think it shouldn't go understated how important the work environment is. Who you work with impacts your job greatly. And so I'm really thrilled to have worked with this great team. And this was us last summer going on a bike ride on University Avenue. So this year, my team has overseen the delivery of 20 kilometers of new bike lanes, cycle tracks, or other bike changes on the street. We've overseen 30 kilometers of upgrades to bike lanes. We've overseen about 4 kilometers of sidewalks. We've installed 18 or modified new signals, and we've overseen about 8 consultant roster assignments. So let's talk a little bit about my team's strengths. So I think some of our strengths right now in implementing these new bike lanes is that we're really working on the cutting edge of bike and roadway design and doing such amazing pilot projects. We have really clear goals and networks through all the city policies already highlighted. We leverage partnerships across the city in the nonprofit space, in the university space, internally to the city, and I think that's really an awesome part. And our team makes a lot of change. Shalyn highlighted at the end, but change is really, really hard. So people rely on transportation for so much. And so when you change a road, even if it seems like a logical change, it impacts the people who live on the corridor, the people who travel on the corridor, and it engages in a greater conversation about who streets are for. Some really great projects we've worked on is a project like the Danforth. So this is a 5-kilometer stretch in the East End where we transform the street to have protected bike lanes, new turn lanes, leading pedestrian intervals, patio spaces, and this was a massive change. I think we received more than 10,000 emails about this project, along with hosting several public meetings that had attendances in the 300 plus range. We continue to field lots of questions and concerns and opportunities to do better. And this is like a real example of that tactical change on a street. It was a 4-lane street. It prioritized through moving vehicles, and we converted it to be a place where there's slower moving traffic, so it has its impacts. But now also has space for people to safely bike, people to dine on the street. And it really was a massive change and something we're very proud of being able to accomplish. We also have been accomplishing a lot more civil reconstruction. So when you rebuild a whole road, you have a lot more opportunity to make more significant changes. I love a construction site personally. I think it's really fun to go see how a road is truly shaped. I think we can get to a place with streets where it's like, this is just what it is, but that's like someone made a decision at one point on the design of the road, right? Whether it was through community engagement or engineering, but someone said, this sidewalk is going here, we're going to plant these trees here. And, all of us in our jobs who are presenting today are helping now to make the decisions of those things that innately impact your life on a day-to-day. And so this one on the left is Cummer Avenue in North York, and it's currently under construction. This was a 4-lane road that's being narrowed to 2 lanes with raised cycle tracks, brand new sidewalks, and lots of other things. This is Lakeshore in Etobicoke, where it was also reconstructed to have better bikeways, better transit facilities, and really that, again, transit, walking, and cycling come together in our work you know, to facilitate the moving from single occupancy driving to a more multimodal system. I already talked a little bit about our recent accomplishments through some of our great projects, but I think some of the other ones is that we're just generally delivering more change, which is great. Whether it be in transit or cycling or walking, we are delivering more and higher quality projects. We have greatly improved our data and monitoring, and Michael highlighted some of those, you know, about how technology has changed, but it really has improved that insight into our work. And we've really strengthened our public engagement processes. But I'm not here to say that this is the perfect world, but we have many, many challenges ahead. We continue to have issues and an immense number of people who die on our streets due to collisions. And this is unacceptable. And we need connected and safer infrastructure faster. And I think that's what we all are working on, the city, and moving that to that direction. We need safer intersection design. We need to continue the practice of collecting better data and understanding our streets. We need to do a better job of communication, creating clear messages and visuals. The onus is on the city for us to ensure that, you know, we're getting our policies and guidelines and why we do the work that we do and the challenges we face really out there and be clear. And we need more equitable engagement processes, and more importantly, the outcomes of those processes, ensuring that we're really meeting our targets to serve all people, but particularly people who have not been served by government in the past. What is my day-to-day like? I would say that every day is a group project. So I work on a team of 20, but I work in a larger organization and a larger city. And so, you know, when your professors assign you a group project, it's not for naught. Everything is about relationship building and figuring out how to work with people who have different perspectives, different backgrounds, different thoughts, and figuring out how to come to consensus and move forward. And it's not easy. It's really not. And I'm sure you all have experienced that in your own work, on your own projects of, you know, how do you finish a project on time with the capacity that you have and all the different personalities of your colleagues at school. We grapple with guidelines, politics, and policies every day. You know, we have great high-level guidance like save tree canopy, right? This is really important. You know, encourage cycling and improve transit. But sometimes on one street, making the decision of, are you prioritizing keeping trees, or are you going to prioritize building a cycle track that's going to actually require cutting down trees? Or are you going to have to do a lane reduction that might actually negatively impact transit, right? So these are those on the ground decisions. And I think I saw in the comments about Shaw Street, you know, and that's an example of grappling with various decision-making processes of, okay, are we going to prioritize easy access, you know, to people's homes and parking, or are we really going to, and community concern about changes that don't allow for driving as much. So, you know, there's just a strong grappling with all the different elements. Yeah, and then just we engage, we design and build, and we deal with issues. But it's always important to remember what's important. And for us, it's really the people and neighborhoods that we work with, building a fairer city, and really people's mental and physical wellness is something that's so important to, you know, working on a team and then also working with the public. And I just want to say that y'all are awesome, and you have so much power to engage and to change streets and to change the future of our mobility. And I think Shalyn already said it, but we do need y'all to engage and lend your ideas and your enthusiasm and really your experiences. You know, don't ever let anybody tell you that just because you are younger or don't live in the city or anything, that you don't have your own transportation experience, because you do. You move through the city, and you know, we need that lens of what you're experiencing, what your hopes and dreams are for the city to make a fairer and better place to live. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Becky. Thanks, everybody. And you are all so awesome. Thanks again so much for all of your expertise and experience and just rich, informative content. We're so grateful for this partnership. So we have about maybe 15 minutes for some questions. And what we're going to do first is do some prepared questions and then go to the live chat questions. For the prepared questions, instead of Pamela and I writing our own, what we did was we asked the students in our class to come up with the prepared questions. So we have a whole bunch of them. We won't be able to get through all of them, but hopefully those can, the ones that we don't get to can be addressed in afterwards with the chat questions. So I'm going to try to get to 3 of our prepared questions, and I'm looking here to try and find a transit planning question, a transit expansion question, and a cycling question. So I'm going to start with a question from Holly, because it's a question that speaks to both public service and public perception and is a little bit political. So I thought that it might be a good question for both city staff and for Councillor Layton to weigh in on. So Holly asks, she says, Toronto residents tend to have a bias towards new subway lines as opposed to other forms of public transit. So how does the city go about educating the public on the benefits of non-subway transit expansion like BRT and LRT? And I would just add to Holly's question whether the Rapid TO program offers an opportunity to, especially in light of its importance from the pandemic perspective, to address transit equity and be a priority. Who wants to take that on? Is that a Shallon question? Mike, Councillor Layton, would you like to start?
I'm a politician, so I'll answer any question that's offered. I would say that it's not easy, and you've heard from like 2 of our best, right, about how it's not easy convincing people. I was at a meeting last night, 2 nights ago. Becky, you were there too. This is a street, Palmerston Avenue. I actually went to Palmerston Public School growing up, but that's another story. Palmerston Avenue is getting contraflow lane, like the least invasive of cycling infrastructure. A couple spaces are proposed, just proposed. We were given options to flip some runways, they're runways now, to flip some right of ways, so what direction they go in, make some roads one way. But these were all like we were given we gave the public a suite of options. To their credit, Becky's team was very creative in coming up with some of these, and it was amazing. Great presentation. Huge reason to do it. Accidents, people dying, too much car traffic on residential streets. And even then, 6 parking spots were going to get removed in a stretch from Bloor to Bathurst. Probably has like 65, 70 spots. And 6 total spots would be removed. Well, wouldn't you know that people are still, whoa, that's parking chaos. Like that's going to cause parking chaos in our community. And why would we want to attract more bikes? Because they're already going the other way down the street. And so it's people have an adversity to change, and you have to start to give them a reason too. I would also say you gotta cultivate local champions. I'm really big on this. When we first installed a contraflow lane on Shaw Street, it was like the first big contraflow lane in the city. I spent months knocking on doors and making sure everyone knew exactly what we were doing on the street. I cultivated local champions through Cycle TO so that they were also knocking on doors. People were talking to their neighbors. So by building that foundation, we still got complaints. And like there's someone complained about the noise from the bike lane, and you'll have to, any of you in the chat can explain that to me. But we got it done. And for the most part, over time, people became more accustomed to it. And years later, when I was running for re-election, I was knocking on those doors again. And some of them had some grumblings, but they took an election sign for me because they grew accustomed to it and they knew why we were doing it. They might not like being able to pull over and unload their groceries in front of their house anymore, but they know why we did it. And that was enough for them to kind of cool their cool their expectations and address their concerns.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody from city staff want to remark on this issue about the perception or bias towards one type of transit technology over another?
So I would say that you need it all, right? So it's not about one or the other. It's that they all collectively provide a purpose, and we need all of them, right? You can never have too much transit, particularly in a city that's growing and expected to grow well into the future. And you do have to give people some choices in the way that they travel. I think one of the problems right now is that there's not enough of anything. So I think that it should be approached from the lens that all of this transit is required to support the city and the region as a whole. I would also say that, going back to my initial comment about having more voices and hearing from more people, will help in sort of the decision making and changing the way the process is working. Because right now we're hearing from a very specific segment of the population, and it happens to be the people who more often than not tend to be the most unhappy with what's being proposed. But there's other voices out there, and we do want to hear from you to ensure that the decisions that are being made and the transit that's being delivered are actually serving your needs as well.
Thanks to both of you. Okay, we're going to jump to a question from, well, it's a combined question from Graham and Paul. So this goes back to cycling. Graham recognizes that the City of Toronto has come a long way in the past 10, 15 years when it comes to bike lanes, but that there are still many bike lanes that are unsafe, not separated with curbs, often blocked by cars and delivery trucks. So Graham is wondering what is being done right now to improve safety citywide. And at the same time, Paul has asked about moving the needle on the Vision Zero dashboard. What's happening in the short term for Vision Zero as well?
I think I'm meant to start here, so I shall. There are a number of things that we're doing to try and move the needle on cycling safety and the cycling network plan. As I discussed in my presentation, we have increased the delivery of new bikeways in the past 2 years, fourfold. So 2020, we delivered more new cycling infrastructure than in the city's history, and more than the past 4 years combined before 2020. And we have continued to deliver more infrastructure. Some ways we're increasing that delivery is by bundling cycling improvements with massive transit improvements like Eglinton LRT or the Finch West LRT project. So those are amazing, huge opportunities that are longer term, but still can help move the needle on those short trips to transit and other trips in the neighborhood. We have increased bundling with existing road work. So if a road needs to be reconstructed or the asphalt is failing, we then bundle cycling improvements with those projects that are a necessary state of good repair. And we have greatly increased our quick build, so transforming roads rapidly with paint and posts. So those are some ways. And we also, I think I had a statistic in there, I think about 30 kilometers of upgrades. So we also look at our existing bike lanes and say, okay, what we did in the 90s, which followed a very strong cyclist mentality that it's comfortable to ride in the road, and that everybody is, a sports cyclist, which is kind of that North American vibe, to being like, okay, we need protection. We want it to be where anyone from 8 to 80 feels comfortable cycling on our streets, and that includes on arterials, major arterials, making improvements to existing bike lanes. And then I already forgot the second question. Sorry. What was Paul's?
No, I think that's great. I'm just looking through the chat, and there's been a lot of questions, a huge thread. I think that started with Chantal asking about recognizing that there are trips that people can't switch from cars. I think the first question from Chantal was adding, there's been a whole discussion on this. So I think this would be interesting to open up to the panel. Does adding more bike lanes and pedestrian walkways increase congestion for vehicles? If so, how would you address this, as many individuals still need to drive to get around? And how would you ensure the safety of bikers and pedestrians with such packed lanes from all forms of transportation? This gets to the issue of so many users with only a limited amount of right-of-way. And yes, there's been a rich back and forth on the chat, but I thought we could just hear from you guys a little bit. Who would like to start?
Yeah, sure. I can start. Michael highlighted that our city is growing. And so if we don't transform the way people move and make it safe for people to walk, cycle, and make it very efficient for people to take transit, we're going to have increased congestion either way. We've already over time have seen increased congestion. So it's really about, for those people who are able to walk and cycle and take transit, to be able to do so as safely, as conveniently, and as comfortably as people can drive in our city today. And that those who do need to continue to use their vehicle will benefit from those moving their trips. But today, people don't feel safe to walk or cycle, and some people do not have an access to a high quality network of rapid transit. So I think that's what's important, is that, our whole city is connected by vehicle lanes for the most part. We have an amazing grid of streets that people can choose to drive, but many people today don't feel that they can choose any other mode unless they absolutely must.
I would just add
go on.
I would just add to Becky's comments that look at any road profile in the city of Toronto, any right-of-way profile between building to building. What's the dominant form of transportation by 80%? Vehicles or vehicle storage. That is not the most efficient way of getting people around the city, around a city. It's actually the most inefficient way of getting people around. We get it. Some people will still need to drive for work. There are deliveries that need to be made. These things need to be factored into our decisions, but we need to make it, as Becky said, as if not more convenient and comfortable for people to get around other ways, so we can achieve our climate targets, so we can achieve our Vision Zero target, so we can achieve a better and higher efficiency transportation network. Things will get more congested for vehicles either way. But the positive way we can do it is by building and making it better, building safer infrastructure for other forms of transportation, and building at least the proportion that group represents within a corridor. Look at Yonge Street, right? 90% of it's for cars right now. 90% of it, but most of the trips are by foot. Like sidewalks have, I think it's like under 12% or something like that. We're putting density there for a reason. We've at least got to make it reasonable for people to get around in those trips. And with that, we need to make sure that they can do short trips and they don't have to drive to grocery stores. They don't have to drive to a Shoppers, although you can, like, you walk around with a stick, you're going to hit a Shoppers Drug Mart in the city of Toronto. You need to put all those other pieces of a neighborhood into a community. So if you're building a new community, you need a handful of things. so that people don't drive. You need a grocery store, a coffee shop, a bar, I would argue, a park, and potentially a short distance from a library. Like the formula is pretty clear about how you build walkable neighborhoods, 10-minute neighborhoods. We've just got to continue to do that and ensure that developers are on board with that. But we are going to have to reallocate space in the right of way.
Thanks, Councillor Layton. I think you're hitting on a number of things. We've had questions about 15-minute cities. We've had questions about Young Tomorrow, which you've brought up on Yonge Street, and really getting to the nexus of planning our developments and planning our transit and doing that hand in hand. Okay, so we need to wrap up. Thank you for all of the questions in the chat and to our students for our questions. And it looks like we will get answers to those, I think, by Wednesday or sometime next week. I want to thank everybody again for your incredible presentations, so much information. We're so grateful for how much time and commitment the city has contributed, and to Councillor Layton as well. Thank you. So the next City Hall session for all of us is on November 5th. It's Cultural Resiliency. And a quick promo of the Civic Lab TO Academic Summit, which is November 23rd, 24th, which is also a partnership with the city and all the academic institutes. And then finally, we're just after 11 o'clock, and I know many of our classes are jumping off of this platform and jumping on to our own. So please do so. In terms of our Ryerson class, just to remind you that Group B will be meeting with Pamela on her Zoom, and Group C will be meeting with me on my Zoom at about 11:15. Does that sound okay? Okay, thanks everybody. Thank you so much. This was so amazing, and have a fabulous weekend.
Thank you.